Well, back to tonight's main news now. And when the Commons voted against joining military action against Syria, it was more than a blow for David Cameron. The impact's being felt around the world. From the summit in St. Petersburg, President Obama is battling to stop Congress following suit as the opposition to his call for action mounts up. And top European officials have warned there can be no military solution to the Syria crisis as well. So how did David Cameron manage to lose such a critical vote? And what role did Labour's Ed Miliband actually play? Our political correspondent Michael Crick has been on the case.
With hindsight, this is a political fiasco that could have been foreseen ever since 82 Conservative MPs wrote to David Cameron in early summer, insisting that if there was to be military action in Syria, there should be a debate and vote in the House of Commons. And what happened last week reflects, in a way, these days, the growing independence and rebelliousness of many MPs on both sides of the House. David Cameron was on holiday in Cornwall when Obama phoned. The president wanted Britain's support for an attack on Syria within the week. 2 days later, Mr. Cameron decided to recall Parliament, in line with what he'd promised MPs this summer. On Tuesday, he summoned Ed Miliband to Downing Street. The Labour leader seemed broadly supportive, saying nothing about the need for more evidence.
We, the Labour Party, would consider supporting international action, but only on the basis that it was legal, that it was specifically limited to deterring the future use of chemical weapons, and that any action contemplated had clear and achievable military goals.
The next day, Labour's stance changed. With Ed Miliband facing a backbench rebellion, his advisers ever more sceptical, Labour said the UN inspectors should be given more time. That night, after a second meeting with Miliband, the government neutered its Commons motion and promised a second vote before any action. Downing Street had given in to Ed Miliband, but Labour still pressed its own amendment, demanding compelling evidence. Tories were furious. "We should have known," says a senior MP, "that someone capable of knifing his own brother would knife Dave as well." So, to the day of the debate. Having returned from their holidays, MPs attended lunchtime meetings with their party leaders. And just before the debate started, Labour confirmed they'd vote against the government. Conservative HQ accused Ed Miliband of playing politics. And in the House, he faced a stinging attack from the former Foreign Secretary Malcolm Rifkind.
I've listened in the most charitable way I can to the Leader of the Opposition, explaining why he cannot support the government's motion. Given that the government responded not simply to his requests, but to those from members on this side, to wait until the inspectors had completed their task, to enable the Security Council to consider the consequences of that. We can only conclude, and the country can only conclude, that the Right Honourable Gentleman is incapable of taking yes for an answer.
By evening, government whips began to think they might lose. For 48 hours, they'd mishandled and misjudged things. The government whips were slow to move into action, partly because people had been on holiday, and partly because initially they thought they'd be able to rely on Labour anyway. So there were many MPs they never talked to, including many of the 82 MPs who'd written to the Prime Minister during the summer demanding there be a Commons debate, an obvious source there of potential rebels. One Tory whip admitted he hadn't managed to phone everybody simply because he'd lost his mobile phone with people's numbers on it. The whole operation was slow and badly prepared. One Tory MP told me David Cameron should have rolled the pitch. Tony Blair would have rolled the pitch again and again. So even the watered-down motion was lost by 13 votes. 30 Tories had voted with Labour, another 31 abstained. That margin would have been much greater if the government hadn't promised a second vote. Cameron left on Friday for Chequers humiliated. But even had he won last week, his remarks to Gary Gibbon today suggest he would have lost that second vote later instead. That would have made his embarrassment even worse and harder to blame it all on Ed Miliband.